Hey friends, welcome back to season 6 of Shop Talk.
This is where we talk about all things related to health and well-being for people who live and work cross-culturally.
Glad you're here. Hi friends, thank you for joining us again for Shop Talk. We're glad you're here. James, who are we talking to today?
Yeah, we're excited to have Ben Porter on, who's the psychosocial and well-being lead for Thrive Worldwide. He's got an MA in psychotherapy from Denver Seminary and a master's certificate from the Harvard program in refugee trauma. Ben has lived and worked in conflict and post-conflict areas as a psychosocial practitioner and advisor with war-affected communities, as well as a staff care expert to international humanitarian and governmental organizations for the past 20 years. He founded and directed the Recreation Project, an adventure-based therapy program for former child soldiers in northern Uganda from 2009 to 2016. He has provided staff care advice and support services to a wide range of international NGOs in East Africa, West Africa, Central Asia, Middle East, the Balkans, and Western Europe, and the USA. Ben, I think we've covered most of the world. His clinical specialism is in trauma therapy, including EMDR, and he is a certified life coach. Ben is passionate about supporting aid and mission workers in phases of transition and reentry. Before joining Thrive Worldwide, Ben worked as a senior trainer and psychotherapist at Inner Health Worldwide. Ben lives in Cambridge with his wife and 2 children. He enjoys distance running along the River Cam while listening to a good podcast. And I will say, I came across Ben because I was reading an article that he helped develop called Approaches to Staff Care and International NGOs, which I found really helpful in some of my PhD work. So excited to have you on, Ben.
Great. So excited to be with you guys. Thanks so much, James and Brandi, for having me on. Yeah, I didn't know that you had read that piece, and that was done when People in Aid was still around, and I did it with Ben Emmons, I think in 2009. So yeah, it's a bit dated now.
Yeah, it's still helpful. So
And it's always encouraging when you hear that people reference your work too. So, Ben, we're going to talk today about perfectionism,
hmm
and seems like that might be a topic that cross-cultural workers can relate to. Wonder how you got started with kind of being involved with this, researching it, trying to understand it more as it involves cross-cultural workers.
Yeah, thanks. I guess to start with, I wouldn't call myself an expert on perfectionism or have done any kind of in-depth research on it. I think I wanted to talk about it with you all today because it just keeps coming up in the with the people I work with, and it's not something that I feel is just a passing issue, but becoming more widespread and leading. It's one of the causes to what we're seeing as a lot of burnout and fatigue and moral injury. I think perfectionism is what's kind of underneath a lot of those things. I can give a definition that I'm using, and this comes from Overcoming Perfectionism, a book written by Roz Shafran, and I like it. And when I read it to some of my clients, they say, "That's me." So perfectionism is the setting of and striving to meet very demanding standards that are self-imposed and relentlessly pursued despite causing problems. It involves basing your self-worth almost exclusively on how well these high standards are pursued and achieved. And I think it's really interesting because people hear the word perfectionism and there's that positive side to it, like it's striving for excellence, it's having high standards. But clinical perfectionism, or the unhealthy version of perfectionism, really is about a fear of failure, and that leads to a lot of different consequences.
Let's just say when we throw cross-cultural work into it, it's like, am I failing God? Am I failing
hmm
these people that I'm working with too? Which just adds more weight to it.
or
Yeah.
supporters, and I think a lot of people might initially say, "Oh, I'm not a perfectionist," but then when you actually look at their, I would call it a theology of work or how they are carrying out what they do, you begin to see it. We've talked a little bit about expectations on the podcast, and to me, I think this is like one of the big keys. And I love that you've already connected to the burnout because that's how I see it too. I like Cloud and Townsend, say the problem is when excellence becomes a demand and not a goal, right? It's this attunement to what we're striving for.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think, some of the differences between healthy and unhealthy perfectionism starts when you see something going from being energizing to being draining, something going from high standards and motivation to something that's associated with self-worth and then
Mm.
low self-worth. And so it's this kind of balancing. And I think people can be in one job in one location and tip from one side to the other. And it's always interesting to know, well, what's the tipping point? Is it, kind of an interpersonal or team dynamics issue, or was it just the sheer volume of the work? And so what starts off as a kind of highly motivated, very purpose-driven lifestyle or vocation or calling can become the thing that starts to take away that vital energy that we need to do the important work.
Have you seen a commonality in the tipping point for people?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. I think because perfectionism, I like the concept because it's very transdiagnostic. I mean, it kind of overlaps a lot of different mental health conditions. And the interesting thing about perfectionism, I think, from what I understand, is that it can be domain specific. So you can be a perfectionist in your career, which is often what I'm working with people, their calling, their mission, their assignment. But you can also have it in parenting, which I'm learning about through experience. Um, you can also have it in body image and physical appearance, which is why oftentimes it's associated with OCD and eating difficulties. You can have it, in how you play sports. So there's different ways in which you can be a perfectionist. I think kind of the number one reason people come to me in the work that I do cross-culturally is team dynamics, though. So there's a way in which there's a mismatch.
Mm.
And I think perfectionists tend to be on the side of rigid thinkers. So it's all or nothing. And when you put that into a group dynamic and someone else sees a different all or nothing, or maybe sees things in grays, you can have those personality clashes.
One of the places I see it most often coming up, because I think we don't always, and I'd love to know your perspective on how to prepare well for people who tend towards that perfectionism tendency, whether it's in the really black and white thinking and rigidity. But I sometimes it's helpful to notice at the end, right, where you're starting to see signs of burnout or interpersonal conflict with teamwork. And I wonder if a lot of times it starts rising to the surface because there is something that they would have considered a failure at, right? Whether it was a project or a team dynamic or something that really they were set forth in one way, and then all of a sudden it didn't work, and then they start throwing more time at it, and somehow more time doesn't produce more results. So then that identity starts really falling apart and crumbling of I have to have this. I'm supposed to be the blank perfect or most ideal leader, worker, husband, boss, athlete, whatever it was.
Oh, James, you're talking about our 7 years in Central Asia right now.
Absolutely. That's all right on. And I think there are a few different ways that it manifests for people. One is the inner critic, which is kind of constantly you're beating yourself up. Nothing's ever good enough. You're judging yourself quite extensively. And another part of that is the projection of that onto others. So your own high standards are then projected onto others, and then you have this kind of unspoken high expectation of them, and they're failing to meet your standards. And we see that a lot, especially, in kind of this purpose-driven work, because we're putting people in places of insatiable need. I mean, to
Mm,
actually kind of solve the problems or is unrealistic. And so we have this, if I don't do this, then, someone is, going to die, or this kind of extreme thinking. So is it kind of this beating yourself up, or is it having high expectations for someone else? And I've noticed that with internationals going into but foreign context, sometimes a perfectionist can actually get along very, very well with the nationals, the local people that they're working with, and have a very difficult time with the internationals because of these kind of expectations. Well, you're supposed to know better, you're supposed to do better. And another way that it pops up is this kind of, I think, this failed reciprocity that you were talking about, James, with, you're putting in more work, you're pouring yourself into it, and then you're in this place where some people are quite tired, quite burnt out, fatigued, aren't committing in the same way, and then you start to build up this resentment. And that's what does, I think, a lot of the interpersonal damage is this kind of this feeling that you're not pulling your weight. I'm working as hard as I can. And then at the same
Mm.
time, these people who are working as hard as they can have a hard time delegating, have a hard time trusting other people to do the jobs. So with perfectionism, there's all these reinforcing cycles.
I wonder if you have thought about this or know why people who people who are drawn to cross-cultural work really tend to struggle with perfectionism.
Yeah, it's hard to know whether which is it the chicken or the egg? Is it the purpose-driven work? Is it they're really passionate about something, or and that's what their perfectionism kind of pulls them into something. It's purpose-driven work, it's meaningful work, it's very important being Christ-like. How can you hold up that standard all the time? But the attempts to do that and to there's some kind of mutually perpetuating dynamic going on between a person with a perfectionistic personality and the purpose-driven, the devotion to a way of life, pouring yourself into something. Yeah, and as I said, it can start off really well, but then it does end up becoming, you're working harder and getting less done. You're avoiding doing something because you're afraid it's not going to be good enough. And then there's, you're right, the procrastination that goes along with perfectionism as well. So all of this pressure that you have to perform actually ends up making you perform less well, achieving less. One of the things I see in the people I work with who have some perfectionistic tendencies is that they're very loaded with pressure, and sometimes that comes from family of origin.
Hmm.
A commonality I've seen is that people's mother or father were very important figures, very impressive figures, whether, they fostered 30 children, or they were a bodybuilder, or they wrote a successful book, or they were a successful lawyer. One of my clients had a father who was an important pastor, minister, and kind of, had this huge legacy. But then there's also that, they say that 25 to 50% of perfectionism is genetic, and the rest is kind of nurture. So there's both the nature and the nurture side to perfectionism.
I think there's also it's a pretty hard life to go live cross-culturally. I mean, you lived in northern Uganda. That's not an easy place to live. So it also takes a certain personality to want that, to crave it, then to do all of the steps that are necessary from, leaving and training and onboarding that I think there's some of that gets reinforced. People that do some of their own support raising, they then have to like communicate that to all of their really financial means. Hey, I'm successful. That's why you should support me. And I think that can kind of build up to it. And then, over time, I think there's enough different things happening cross culturally in terms of life. And if you have a family navigating what that means, that for those that are already in that kind of perfectionist tendencies, eventually something's going to crack. I think in
Hmm.
the real world situation, those people get promoted and are in a business and constantly get the kind of good reinforcement of their perfectionism in ways that it may have less external input that eventually start to crack, or maybe it takes a little bit longer for that to crack in terms of the moving towards burnout and depression. I remember somebody I worked with was really successful at well digging and had done it for a long time and was great at it. Was able to navigate perfectionism even in East Africa, which is not an easy thing to do with a
Hmm.
Western context, right? And then eventually there were some situations that came up where it just didn't work out. And when you look at through the cultural lens, you're like, that was bound to happen. Like it's almost amazing he went so long without that happening. And it was crippling, all the way
Hmm.
to the point of incapacitating depression
Hmm.
based on just like one time it not working out well.
Yeah, and I think perfectionistic people have a hard time looking at the positive, right? It's always there's always something missing. There's
Right.
always something that's not good enough,
Yeah.
and all of us will make mistakes. And I think that's one thing perfectionists really struggle to do is make a mistake and kind of bounce back to be okay with something not going right. It's that rigid thinking. So I encourage people to stop discounting the positive, whether that's a
Right.
gratitude journal or just noticing the delights around you as often as you can, because more often than not, you're thinking of the deficit, you know.
Mm.
Four people said good job, one person didn't say anything, and it's, oh, I must have really screwed that up. It's that
Right.
again, it's that all or nothing thinking, but very strongly on the negative side of things.
I
Which is
wonder.
complicated in a cross-cultural environment where like language learning is all based on failing. You
Yeah.
have to be able to try it
Yes.
and mess up and have somebody be like, "Oh, that's not how you say it."
Well, there are people who like will just go out and be like, I'm just going to start talking and I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. And then others who won't
Yeah.
talk unless they know that what they say is correct. I'm wondering then if it can
Mm,
manifest in different ways because I know, like, you know, perfectionism can drive you to work harder and harder. I wonder if some people too can be paralyzing to where they feel immobile because they feel so overwhelmed by like what's in front of them that they don't like they're afraid of failing so much that they don't do anything.
that's exactly what happens. Yeah. Yeah. You see indecision. You see procrastination, you see just straight up avoiding, you see this wild multitasking that's actually not going anywhere because the one big thing that needs to be done is so scary. You know, what if I don't do it right? What if it's not good enough? And it will almost certainly not be good enough until you decide that it is good enough. One of the things I encourage anyone I see who's perfectionist to do is to do it badly. I just say that, do it badly. Practice doing it badly. And do you know what? It's probably not that bad. And you've probably done a fine job. And isn't it amazing how much more time and energy you save from just letting it go, doing it badly? And I think most perfectionists are very, very well practiced at being that way. So they need to be very, very well practiced in the other direction. So
Mm.
just going over and over, you know, these behavioral experiments where they can do something just good enough and then notice like, oh, did everyone come out like scowling and you know, did the presentation completely flop? And almost all the time they've saved tons of time and energy and the outcome was about the same or even better. That's the
Mm.
paradox with perfectionism, right? They're working harder and getting less done, being less productive, being paralyzed, as you say, of getting it wrong. Yeah.
Cloud Townsend say perfectionism is an incapacitating force. It stops us from connecting with the real.
I like that. It absolutely is a block. It's a stopper being a perfectionist is. And
Yeah.
I really like compassion focused therapy. And
Mm.
I've done some studying of CFT with Paul Gilbert up in Derby here. I know
Mm.
Kristen Neff does some stuff in the States, but it's essentially around that inner bully that keeps criticizing you, which
Mm.
stops awareness of the actual emotion behind it. So when something happens, you're defending it very quickly with you know, you're a loser, you're never going to get this, and you're not good enough, and all of these things actually stop you from recognizing, oh, there's fear there, oh, there's sadness there, oh, there's anger there, and then as you say, like getting to the reality of it, the inner bully blocks the ability to get at the emotions underneath it. And then CFT is all about gaining the courage to have a real look at what's going on in the emotional space and then to try to have some self-compassion about that, some more understanding about that.
Mm.
I like that picture of an inner bully.
Mm.
That's a good visual.
I use that a lot and I try to get people to really cultivate what the inner bully says, what the inner bully looks like, what's the tone of the inner bully's voice, and you get to sometimes it's actually a trauma from the past. There was a teacher or a boss or a parent who was super critical and couldn't do anything to please them. And other times it's what they call a internalized persecutorial object, you know, so it's just yourself, just
Yeah.
lambasting yourself all, you know, yeah, over and over. And we can be very cruel to ourselves.
Yeah.
And what I hear people, you know, when I ask them what their inner bully is saying, it's just so tough. It's sad.
Mm.
And so we try to soften that. We try to reframe that, but it helps to really paint a picture of that inner bully so that you can see it and you can decide to turn away from it. I don't think it's helpful, and that's one of the big challenges I have with compassion focused therapy. I think, oh, it's so warm and fluffy and soft,
Mhm.
and you're just getting, you know, you're just letting yourself off the hook and you're going to become lazy. You're going to become mediocre. You need that inner bully to spur you on. And the more I work with the clients on their inner bully, they realize that it has no good intention. for them, this inner voice, this inner critic has no good intention. It will keep punching away.
I wonder if you have any thoughts on the role of shame in all of this.
I think that could be one of the starting points. I was just talking to at Thrive, we've got this reflective space that we do every week, and we were talking a little bit about perfectionism. And one of our psychologists from Kenya was talking about the role
Mm,
of shame in perfectionism, and having to do with well, I think it's different for everyone where the shame comes from, but it could be, again, not letting your parents down, or this idea that you had to, there was always something earned, and if you weren't working
mm.
hard to earn that affirmation, then you didn't have the value or the worth. So yeah, I think shame is a big part of where it comes from.
What are some other things that you do to sort of connect with people and help them to, I don't know, see what's going on and help them to work through this?
Yeah, if I have a good enough rapport with someone, I'll point out how self-important what they're saying is, how they can't delegate, how they can't get on with things because, it's not perfect. And well, that's a bit arrogant, isn't it? To feel like, you're holding all the strings to this insatiable need or this massive need. But, also talking about one of the ideas around resilience that I like is the concept of self-complexity. You're not just an employee, you're not just a dad, you're not just a brother or cousin, you're not just an athlete. You're lots of different things.
Mm.
And when people get kind of hyper focused in one area of perfectionism, we try to see what we can do to loosen that up a little bit and broaden the different spheres of life that they can put some interest in, so that, if and when something goes bad in the area that they, hold high standards for, they've got other resources to rely on. Yes, the do it badly, the mantra of good enough. I have a client who was overworking as part of their perfectionism, and I said, aim to work at 80% capacity.
Mm.
And that was fun because you would give a perfectionist a metric and they're like, oh yeah, I can do that. And so she came back saying, she's like, oh, I nailed it. I'm doing the
Yeah,
80% perfectly.
perfect.
Yeah, and even in sessions, they are like a bit people pleasing, right? So they're a lot of fun to work with. And then you can let them know, hey, it's okay if we, disagree about something, or if we got a little rupture in our rapport, like let's practice that, because
Mm.
that's again, the fear of letting other people down. So they're very good clients. So they do therapy perfectly. They'll be doing all of the homework and all of the worksheets and
Yeah.
I did so well 80%. I went to 90%.
that's not allowed. 80% is perfect. So let's go there.
I wonder if you could talk a little about the balance of all of this perfectionism with being good enough and with people who might actually tend towards somewhere on the spectrum of low accountability, all the way up to possibly lazy. Like, how does all of that fit in this kind of huge range of like engaging with work and how to balance those two ends? Like, how do you find the middle ground between not working actually hard enough or to your best and then perfectionism? Like,
Yeah, well, I think people who aren't working or striving, there's a reason for that, and I don't always know what the reason is. But I do know that if you do overdo it, then it's a sure path to going into the direction of being, flattened, burnt out, done, needing a year off. They say, a real burnout experience is, at least 6 months to 2 years,
mm,
and oftentimes massive, massive changes, whether that's moving back home, having a new career, end of a relationship. So when perfectionism really takes root, you kind of end up going to the place that you fear the most. But again, paradoxically, that place can also be a kind of a comfortable place because at least they're not trying, and so they can't
right.
fail. So like I said, I think there is that tipping point somewhere in meaning and motivation, when you go from that feeling energized to feeling drained, feeling like
Mm,
you've got high standards and motivation and interest and intrigue, to I'm not doing this well enough. I think that's where the tipping point is. So keeping people in that green zone, as we say,
yeah.
where they're pacing. We need to take rest, daily, weekly, monthly, annually. We need cycles of rejuvenation. It's not a luxury. I stopped trying to convince perfectionists to change because most perfectionists are very stubborn in their way. Even when I'm, asking them to take rest, they'll come back and they say, "Oh, I really didn't optimize my rest day. Like I slept in, I wasted all this time. I really should have been on my journal and been knitting my blade." All the things they think they should have been doing.
That's really funny.
Mm.
Are there ways that churches and sending organizations contribute to this or can make it worse?
Yeah. That's
Yes.
a that's a
Next
really
question.
it's a really good question and a very big part of the variable. Perfectionists will definitely be self-burners, but there is very much there can be cultures that perpetuate, that
Mm,
reinforce that natural propensity of a person anyway. So absolutely, the workplace culture can be one that encourages depleting. It says, we need to, self-sacrifice and self-abandon, ourselves for this cause, for this task. And then they model doing that. So working
mm,
long hours, emails at all hours of the night, not taking their annual leave. I think when people are going into a situation where there is that insatiable need, it's helping the managers and the leaders to allow other people to hold space for that feeling of helplessness of I wish I could do more, but I can't, and finding the ability to find worth in what you can contribute. Not that you're going to solve the problem or that there's going to be some major shift societally, but that a good leader and manager can kind of help them hold that ambiguity, that really difficult feeling. Yeah, model rest, model making mistakes. I think one of the best things that an organization can do is show that they don't have it all figured out. Some organizations I've worked with will, the faith and spirituality will be at a certain, expectation. People may unintentionally say, talk about using prayer as a way of, I don't know. I think there's probably some shame in if you prayed more or if you
mm,
had more belief. And just people having different kind of orientations around what their spirituality means, and what their faith means. And so when something so important comes into like needing to get stuff done, like there's
mhm.
just a convergence of meaning and existential importance in several different places. And so where one person gains strength from, quiet contemplation, another person might gain strength from active, and outdoor exercise or sport.
A lot of organizations will take you for all you got, right?
Mm.
I wish
Yeah.
that more teams and organizations would have a culture around holding each other's boundaries. Like there's just an empty void to dump time and energy and capacity into in almost all the organizations I know, right? There's work that will always go undone. We'll never hit 100% of everything that we would like to or have set out to do. So if teams and organizations, I think, would have better rhythms of life that you're talking about, or help reinforce boundaries within the context of their team and be like, no, actually, we as a group are going to do some strategic withdrawal where we decide what we're not going to do today so that we do have boundaries for tomorrow. I think often that's lost because everybody's just spinning. And whenever this person has a boundary, there's more work on this person and then more work on that person. And I think people feel that.
Well, I remember when we were preparing to go on the field and reading stories and articles by other cross-cultural workers, and the theme was like you don't say no, and you're just always trusting God to give you the energy for these situations that never end and the need that never ends. And it's like you also trust God to give you a brain and recognize what your body's telling you to.
We'll rest when we're dead.
Yeah. Well, Jesus was sleeping during the storm and he went off to pray by himself. He modeled rest. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and boundaries.
And boundaries. Yeah. Take up your cross. It's like, oh, wow, that's a pretty high, high calling.
Yeah.
So it's both, isn't it? And it's really tricky, and for someone who thinks, it's either this way or that way, it's a yes or a no, it's right or it's
Right.
wrong, which happens with the perfectionistic personality. It's going headlong into the hardest, most severe passages that are interpreted in a certain way that means I need to spend myself until I'm
Right.
done, until I'm
Yeah.
exhausted. And that's the badge of honor. That's the sign. Oh, you've done this well. Like, You've spent it all. It's all you've left it all on the field. And you're right, James, that organizations will take you for what you give. And I think it's one reason why in the humanitarian space we've got a lot of very young people. Contracts are short. Organization, people need jobs. Take them in and chew them up, spit them out.
I worked with a 25-year-old who it was literally all on him for food distribution for like an entire refugee camp. And he felt that straight out of college, into a remote place, running a feeding center for like 30,000 people or something. It's like, wow.
Wow. And his frontal lobe is just barely developed at that point anyway.
That's right.
It's part of why he said yes to the job.
Yeah, that's right.
And the thrill seeking, there's definitely that side of it too, the humanitarian. I think there's quite a lot of neurodivergence and a lot of inattentive, a lot of novelty. Yes, I mean, probably, yeah. Just getting excited and motivated about new situations and new challenges, and then those of us who are wired that way end up starting a lot of things,
Yeah,
and not necessarily seeing them all the way through.
Then, as we think about wrapping up, do you have some books you'd recommend on this, articles, podcasts, things like that our listeners might be interested in?
So I mentioned already the Overcoming Perfectionism. That's Roz Shafran et al. There's also Brené Brown has a book called The Gift of Imperfections, which a lot of people like. And then there's there's another really good book that's called, let me make sure I get the name right. When Perfect Isn't Good Enough, and that's by Martin Anthony and Richard Swinson. So those are three books. I work with clients through overcoming perfectionism because it's just very practical. Like the chapters 5 through 10 are just different kind of CBT modeled self-help. And so I think it's really helpful.
How can people find more about your work or possibly reach out to you or to Thrive Worldwide?
Yeah, we'd love to hear from anyone. Our website is thrive-worldwide.org. I'm ben.porter@thrive-worldwide.org. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to drop us a line or, be good to be in touch.
And I'll give a plug. You guys at Thrive Worldwide do great seminars. They're really available. I encourage people to sign up for the mailing list. I'm on it. I love jumping in on some of the different trainings and workshops that you guys do. Great content that's available and specifically designed for cross-cultural workers.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for this conversation.
Yeah, it's been great to have you. Look forward to running into you somewhere in the wide world.
I hope so. That'd be fantastic. And thank you both for your time in the chat. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Thanks so much.
I'm sorry about my mic. Apparently, James has been messaging me the whole time, like, the mic's not working, the mic's not working. Sorry, is it my mic, James? Okay, I don't know what's wrong with it. It's not working great. This is all the time.
Don't panic. I'm going ahead and hitting the record button so I don't forget later. So far, I've only forgotten once, and that's no fun.
That was enough for us to remember.
It was.
Here we go. James is going to figure out. He's going to figure out a connection right now.
Bring the average age down.
We listen. He used to tell me I did, but you don't tell me that anymore.
Yeah, it's true.